2024 is coming to a bitter, merciless end, but why worry about the future when we can clutch desperately and violently to our comfortable past? If there's one thing that brings people together during the holidays, it's getting angry at other people's gaming opinions. So allow me to provide some flames for your Yule log with a Game of the Year list that won't contain anything you wanted and everything you hated. Take this coal and shove it down your gobbler. It's time to talk about the best games of 2024. But this video is going to be more than just that, because if there's anything I love more than video games and sleeping in my clothes, it's making lists. So if you just want to get right to the final, definitively undefinitive list, go to this timestamp here. For the rest of you wonderful creeps, enjoy this pointless detour of additional lists and a look to the future. If you're new to this channel, or you last saw my UFO 50 video and thought, hey, it's that cartoon character with the giant creepy eyes. First of all, rude. I'm getting surgery on them. Secondly, I play way too many games. You probably saw Jacob Geller's video and thought, wow, that guy played a lot of games. Now, a lot of those games were not from this year, but that doesn't make them any less special. Here are just a few of the best indie games I played this year that came out in years prior. Some people might have recognized a few standouts already, like the retro puzzle platformer Elekhead or the meta-horror visual novel Slay the Princess. But fewer people might recognize Dreams in the Witch House, a Lovecraftian combination of point-and-click adventure and time management that has you trying to advance in your studies at university while dealing with an otherworldly threat lurking just beyond your bedroom wall. Another point-and-click adventure I really enjoyed was Strangeland by the developers of Primordia. It's heavily inspired by Sanitarium and Darkseid, with surreal and grotesque visuals and a dreamlike narrative set somewhere between life and death. I didn't just play tiny indie games, however. I rushed through Hi-Fi Rush, I stranded all the deaths, I ran amok through the streets of Ghostwire Tokyo. Honestly, I don't think that studio ever truly made a bad game. But I think it's more fun to talk about the lesser-known games. Even in the AA space, I think The Chant has the chance to be a cult classic, with its psychedelic vibes and its action-heavy approach to dealing with threats. Not every horror game has to be hiding in a closet. Vision's Soft Reset is a cool time travel take on the common Metroidvania, where some things can be taken with you and some can't, leading to route optimization as well as utilizing new knowledge in old areas. It's not perfect, but it's a solid execution. On the precision side of platforming is Bzzzt, which is not just fun to say, but also an incredibly gorgeous game, and one of the best in the time trial subgenre. And despite all the games I've played, there's many more that I missed, which leads me to our first official list. My top list for this year has dozens of entries on it, but my wish list has dozens more. There are a lot of games that I wanted to get my hands on this year, but because of my very low income, had to put off until a distant sale. Some of these games are so for me that you'll be grabbing me and shaking me for not playing them. Here are the best games that could have made my list if I wasn't suffocating in poverty.
Exophobia.
Take a Metroidvania and mix it with Wolfenstein 3D, and you've got Exophobia. And obviously I love those things, but I'm not sure if that will result in quality map design or not, when you only have a single plane and no jump.
One button bosses.
That single button largely determines how you dodge enemy attacks, while everything else is handled automatically. And despite that, it's surprisingly intense. I love boss rush games, and this looks to be a pretty great one.
Lock Digital.
I have an easy out for not covering this game as it just came out this month, but Lock Digital is an awesome recreation of a letter-based gamebook that is intuitive to learn and solve and pleasing to look at as well. Or lock at?
Linkito.
Linkito wouldn't normally be the kind of puzzle game I'd be into, but the dystopian setting and weird machines you're fixing are kinda compelling in their own right. I just hope the puzzles themselves don't fall into trial and error too often.
Auntie.
Just look at how amazing this game looks. It was even on Game Pass for a while, but my broke ass had to cancel my sub so I couldn't get to it this year. But still, great art style and possession mechanics are definitely on the Matt Wilson bingo card, so it's just a matter of time before I get a chance to play it.
Terra Memoria.
In a crowded year for RPGs, I'm not surprised that Terra Memoria stayed in the shadows, but I do think it's pretty neat from what I played of the demo. It's got that 2.5D look without being an obvious clone, and the combat is actually pretty inspired. But if I was going to have a decently sized Game of the Year list, longer games were just gonna get in the way of playing as many games as I could. So off to 2025 with you, and hopefully you can find an audience.
Demon Masquerade.
The art might be a little odd, but I think Demon Masquerade's got a lot of promise. But as you'll see with my top list, I already had a lot of mystery games to play through, so I couldn't fit this one in.
The Hidden Art of Innkeeping.
Sure, it uses stock RPG Maker assets, but the original Lost Art of Innkeeping was a cool surprise, cramming the engine into a hotel management sim, with additional exploration and adventure elements, and the sequel looks to be more the same.
Gestalt, Steam, and Cinder.
Apparently, Gestalt ended up being a bit of a disappointment. I hope that I still end up enjoying it, because I absolutely love the 32-bit art, and the combat felt pretty good a couple of years ago. But if it isn't up to snuff, it wouldn't be the first or last time a highly anticipated Metroidvania didn't live up to the hype.
Scarmond.
Scarmond is a classic 8-bit dungeon crawler with a unique skill purchasing progression system, and it looks slavishly devoted to being the best possible kind of that specific thing. There will be a time when I'm up for a 50-hour journey, but not with deadlines the way they've been. Maybe in 2025.
Veritas.
This sequel to the Game Boy Color-inspired Prodigal takes the character-focused Zelda clone in a more cryptic and dungeon-heavy experience. It's only $7, so you can bet I'll get to this one and possibly review it for the channel.
Exhaustive.
Despite the Metroidvania tag, this is more of a linear puzzle platformer, but it's still got some cool ideas going for it, mixing particle physics, photography, deduction mechanics, and also some very peculiar abilities.
Flowstone Saga.
All I really need to say here is Tetris RPG. But if that's not enough, it's by longtime OC Remix contributor Zircon, who has also made some great VST instruments as part of Impact Soundworks. But that's music, you say? Yeah? Well, who the fuck are you? Dr. Ebert? Look, the demo was neat and the Tetris battles are cool. That's all I care about.
Leap Year.
Two of the largest contributors in the itch.io space have been Daniel Linson and the Sock Pop Collective, so it only makes sense that the two of them would come together at some point to release another banger that's cheap and short. Leap Year is a self-described clumsy platformer about managing your jump heights that is chock full of secrets. This one just couldn't get on the schedule, otherwise you might have seen it in my official top 40.
Bloomtown.
I'm not sure if the mix of Life Sim and Stranger Things JRPG are a perfect fit, but Bloomtown comes from the developers of Graveyard Keeper, which despite my issues with its endgame was an incredibly addictive title. If it were to pop up in a bundle, I'd have a hard time saying no to it. I just hope they've learned a lesson or two about not making tedium an intentional design mechanic.
Lorne's Lore.
Do you like to climb out of bounds? This is pretty much the game for you. Lauren's lore is all about climbing impossible spaces and finding your own path in an absolutely massive environment. If you ever played Naissance, I realize that's just a couple thousand people, but maybe all of them are in the audience. This game is pretty similar, but you're going up instead of down.
Key locker.
Chalk this omission up once again to the JRPG glut. I really like Keylocker's isometric art style, and its unique setting is certainly a standout, though I've heard that combat is somewhat divisive. I still need to play through Munana's previous games first, however.
Caravan sandwich.
This game's got an interesting split between critics and fans, as the Steam rating is far higher than the Metacritic aggregate. I could probably rant about gaming websites giving indie games a much less favorable curve, but instead I'll just say that this looks like a cool mix of adventure and combat-free exploration in the same vein as Sable.
The Abandoned Planet.
I don't have a ton of point-and-click adventures to talk about this year, but The Abandoned Planet is one I really want to try, with its beautiful art and animation and ICOM-inspired interface.
Real Web Legends.
This may be the most bizarre inclusion, and maybe that's exactly what you're looking for. Real Web Legends looks kinda like an N64 game, and there's some seriously silly style and comedic timing at work with the trailer. I can always check up on it next year though, as the game is still in early access.
Crypt Custodian.
All Kyle Thompson does is make quality Metroidvanias, and Crypt Custodian looks like it's another great one, in the vein of Death's Door. The two games even come bundled together, so they're fine with the comparison. And it's got an overwhelmingly positive rating on Steam, so I wouldn't be surprised if I enjoyed it a lot.
Arranger.
While the role-puzzling part of Arranger's subtitle should probably require air quotes, I'm still interested in the unique line slide mechanic that makes up the game's puzzles. The demo didn't give me enough of a sense of whether the game will open up or not, but it's a part of Netflix games, so I'll probably try it on my phone at some point.
Times and Galaxy.
So I'm not exactly sure how much your choices will truly matter in this game, but I am intrigued by this journalism-based story game where you go to various events and investigate every detail before then putting your own spin on the story when you go to print. Whether it'll be good will mainly hinge on the quality of the writing.
Frog Monster.
I don't normally enjoy the voxel look, I tend to think it's tacky unless done really well, but Frog Monster may be one of the few exceptions, on top of being a first-person shooter Metroidvania with a ton of bosses. The thing is, I already have a bunch of boomer shooters to play, so I can't really get to this one yet.
Blood on the Thames.
Only 5 people in the world are going to know this one. It's a visual novel with live-action characters that reminds me a bit of 428 Shibuya Scramble, but set in a Victorian setting with eldritch creatures lurking under the surface. It's a bit ugly on the interface side, but I'm heavily intrigued by the story and storytelling. And there's some contradiction mechanics because, why not?
Erebon Shadow Legacy.
Take a stealth game and mix it with the ink swimming of Splatoon, and you've got a pretty interesting game concept. If only more people agreed with me. I played a demo and found it to be pretty fun, so I don't know why Erebon Shadow Legacy didn't resonate with people. Or maybe this is the first time you've heard of the game. Why do I feel like that's more likely?
The Secret of Vuronis.
There's no real disguising what the Secret of Vuronis is. It's basically a 4th Final Fantasy Legend game, or in other words, a saga game, right down to building a party out of multiple species that each level up in their own unique way. I think the main reason I didn't dive right on this is because I still have to play those original 3 Legends games.
Bloodless.
Bloodless is an absolutely sick action game based primarily on pacifism. Because you play as a reformed Ronin, your moveset is designed merely to incapacitate your enemies. It's a kick-ass game with an awesome visual look that just didn't fit into my schedule this year, so I can only vouch for the demo.
Fallen Leaf.
It's weird how, despite Shovel Knight's success, there haven't been that many games to try to match its look or feel. Fallen Leaf isn't necessarily that, it's more of a Mega Man style game, but obviously the aesthetic, aspect ratio, and world map evoke the Yacht Club classic. I didn't buy this one primarily because the game didn't have a demo. All I know of it is its trailer, and I like to get my hands on something to know if I'm gonna like it.
Thank goodness you're here.
It's a comedy game, and comedy games are really hard to get right, especially when everyone has their own preferences. but it does sound like they nailed it, as Thank Goodness You're Here is full of sight gags, great animation, and the maximum acceptable amount of British humor.
Pepper Grinder.
Perhaps the most video game on this list, Pepper Grinder fits that Nintendo mold of strongly designed 2D obstacle courses with hidden green stars. The biggest complaint I've heard on this one is that it's short, which isn't a huge problem for me. I even like the demo, I just haven't bought the game yet. Oh well!
Penny's Big Breakaway.
The Sonic Mania team made a 3D platformer with a color palette inspired by Sega Genesis classics, and the mechanics are built around yo-yo tricks. How on earth did I pass this up? Well, the game having a $30 price point and me having no job were a poorly timed combination here. Maybe one of those things will change next year.
Conscript.
As it turns out, survival horror is a natural fit for World War I. You don't even need zombies or malfunctioning robots or whatever. The sheer terror of the trenches is scary enough. And Conscript has a great sense of atmosphere and ends up utilizing those trenches to create a solid puzzle labyrinth just like the all-time greats. I almost pulled the trigger on this one this past month, but ended up going with a different game, which ended up being in my top 10, so I can't be too upset.
Until Then.
I played the demo for Until Then a year ago, and though it was a slow burn, I found myself really being drawn to it. I don't necessarily love all the characters in the story, but they're very well realized, and of course the visuals are sumptuous. I kinda compared this one to Perfect Tides in the past, and I'm not sure if it's actually on that level, but it could be, and it's certainly been overlooked this year.
The Crimson Diamond.
Yeah, this has to be the most my brand game to come out this year. A full-scale tribute to Laura Bow Games, right down to the dithered EGA graphics and text parser. I have no real excuse for not playing this one, but it ultimately comes down yet again to money. You can bet I'll be playing this one sometime in 2025 though, and maybe I'll even do a proper review video for it too. Just not tonight. Moving on, that list had a lot of games that I can't say for sure are good or bad without getting my hands on them myself. But there are some games that I missed that I already know are great. So consider this next list a healing jelly for your outrage that the games included didn't make the final cut. I'm saying they're good, you're a good person for liking them, and better than everyone who didn't like them. Without further ado...
Anton Blast.
This Wario Land tribute came out just a bit too late in the year for me to be able to play it, but I'm just gonna go ahead and roll December releases into next year's deliberations, so we'll hopefully be seeing this one next December, along with
The Rise of the Golden Idol.
Not only did I not have time for this one, but I also only have it on iPhone without a great capture solution, so you'll just have to take my word for it that Rise of the Golden Idol is another cool deduction game, with really strange characters and even stranger mysteries. For some people it was a slight step down, and I do miss the pixel art, but there's nothing that matches the macabre energy of these games.
Mouthwashing.
Everyone I know and respect has talked about how great this short horror experience is, and I thought I'd get to play this one myself as well, but I think I forgot to send a key request when it came out, so my own incompetence got in the way there. I'm a dipshit!
Echo Point Nova.
The Severed Steel developer took their high-speed John Woo game and thought, what if there were fewer walls? Now you're blasting around in the sky, skateboarding from island to island as you waste enemies and gain new abilities. It's a wild shooter sandbox, and one that I hope to play in 2025 once I've gotten through my FPS backlog.
Grapple Dogs. Cosmic Canines.
If you like platformers, you need to play this now. I know I haven't played it, but I played the original, and I'm telling you, Grapple Dog is amazing. It's one of the best modern 2D platformers to come from someone other than Nintendo. In fact, I actually like the first Grapple Dog more than Super Mario Wonder, so consider that my highest recommendation. This one's pretty good too, probably.
Core Keeper.
It's Terraria, but top-down, and I loved Terraria. And people love Core Keeper as well, as it's sold like hotcakes and has a 92% approval rating on Steam with over 38,000 reviews. The main decision for me is whether to dive into this solo or with friends, and I just haven't decided yet.
Tactical Breach Wizards.
Speaking of humor, I don't know if people realized just how funny Tactical Breach Wizards was going to be, but Tom Francis had already cut his teeth on physical comedy with the way failures happen in Gunpoint and Heat Signature, so it really shouldn't have been a surprise. I'm just here for the strategy, and Breach Wizards seems to have high-quality mission design to match the comedy.
Celaco.
I already know how good Celaco is because I've played a demo of it and I've sung its praises before, but I was very confused by their claim that the early access version was the full campaign, when it clearly wasn't, so I'm just doing what I always do with early access games and waiting for the true 1.0.
9 souls.
I think the biggest reason why I didn't play Red Candle Sekiro-like is because, well, I still haven't played Sekiro. Maybe 9 Souls could be a good gateway to that game, but it still feels like I'd be playing them in the wrong order. I know that's a bit of a spurious reason, but I'm just weird like that.
Elatro.
Look, I know this is a good game, everyone has told me it's a good game, but I have a bit of a bias against roguelites and deck builders, so I was never gonna play it. You don't need to convince me otherwise, I know it's great. I hope that you all continue to enjoy it. Just let me live my Balatro-free life in peace. Now, I can't talk about a bunch of indie games without at least giving some sort of acknowledgement of the hardworking people that toil endlessly on AAA games only to be thanklessly laid off by corporate executives who think the AI girlfriend they talk to on their phone is real and will marry them. I am aware that there were some pretty cool AAA games released this year, from Indiana Jones to Astrobot, the Elden Ring DLC, many JRPGs, and the extremely apolitical Helldivers 2. But there can be only one AAA game. That is to say, I only played one AAA game. I'm poor! I generally don't mess around with Ubisoft. I find their CEO to be a jackass and the games they make don't interest me much anyway. But when a group of former Rayman artists came together to make a new side-scrolling Prince of Persia game, I couldn't help but take a look. It also helped that it was just a few pennies on GameFly with the coupons I had, but I'd certainly pay full price for this game if I had to. The Lost Crown is a fabulous Metroidvania that manages to sit comfortably between the extremely long endurance tests of Hollow Knight or Soldiers, and the smaller worlds of Islets or 9 Years of Shadows. All of the abilities you get just make sense, not just within the genre, but within the Prince of Persia universe. The enemy and location variety is great, and helped to keep my interest spiked through longer play sessions. The only real bummer about the game is the fate of the development team, who weren't exactly laid off, but were broken up and shuffled onto other projects. One of those projects is Beyond Good and Evil 2, which, are you fucking kidding me? You may as well have them working on nothing. I mean, they are, really. That game is nothing. It's never coming out. It's just a developer dungeon. This is why I can't stand AAA development. Ugh! It probably won't shock anyone who has kept up with the channel, but a lot of the games in this list are games I reviewed right here on YouTube, so we'll keep this one relatively brief. But here's how I ranked the retro games I played in 2024, starting with
Fear Effect.
Probably the worst and most disappointing retro game I played was Fear Effect, which didn't get an official review, so let's just go over it now. It's a survival horror game that focuses more on action and cinematics, with an attempt to merge cel-shaded character models with the full-motion video backgrounds you might expect from Final Fantasy VII. But it just doesn't work. The FMV is ridiculously blurry and full of noise, even playing at 640 by 480. There are too many insta-kill sequences, and the linear progression results in uninspired map design.
Tonic Trouble.
Yeah, I just covered this one and gave it a negative review, and it still wasn't in last place, so that should tell you something about Fear Effect. I still think this one had potential, it just doesn't feel finished, and looks like a dollar store version of Rayman 2, which came out the same year. A shoddy camera, ugly character designs, and short runtime make this a forgettable platformer on a console full of better ones.
Final Fantasy Mystic Quest.
I didn't review this one for the channel, but it's because there's so little to say about it. It's as simple as people have always labeled it, and yet it's ridiculously encounter-heavy, and sometimes there are a couple of weird difficulty spikes that stem from not having proper strategical options. It's a curious footnote and nothing more.
Evolution: The World of Sacred Device.
As far as RPGs go on the Dreamcast, you can do far better. Like, Skies of Arcadia, Grandia 2. But look, Evolution isn't that bad, it's just not anything special. It's a pure dungeon crawler experience, and it just doesn't have the kind of variety to the enemies or layouts to make it worth going out of your way to play. At least the first entry anyway.
Unsolved Crimes.
I had never heard of this game until I played it for the first time, and for what it is, it's kind of neat. A criminal investigation game where you scope out a crime scene and then answer questions based on the clues you've discovered. There's an aspect of this game that definitely feels a little ahead of its time when you consider deduction games like Scene Investigators today. It's just a bit too basic and easy to figure out who did it in most cases, despite being aimed at an adult audience. Another interesting relic, but not a standout.
Popful Mail.
As I said in my review video earlier this year, I love the characters, the hand-drawn animation done in pixel art, the chirpy music, and the Saturday morning cartoon vibes. It's just all brought down by the awful difficulty tweaks made by working designs. The difficulty of the Sega CD version is so ludicrous that it is near impossible to finish it without using save states. Thank goodness there are fan patches.
Jumping Flash 1 and 2.
It's kind of surprising that these two ancient 3D platformers have aged as well as they have, considering they sort of pioneered the genre and were largely made at the beginning of the 5th generation of consoles. Sure, they're relatively simple arcade-style affairs, but they have an up-tempo feel, weird abstract levels, and multiple post-game remixes. Just go with an emulator and overclock these games so they run at more playable frame rates.
Banjo-Kazooie Grunty's Revenge.
Somehow Rare managed to recapture the 3D Banjo gameplay onto a 2D platform, and that's pretty impressive. The minigames are awful, but aside from that, almost everything you'd expect from a Banjo game is here, including the full moveset, multiple Mumbo transformations, and plenty of Jiggies and Jinjos to collect. It won't hold a candle to the N64 games, but I admire it for its ambition.
Muppets Monster Adventure.
Who would have thought that a licensed Muppet game would turn out to be a pretty solid Spyro the Dragon clone? You've got the glide and the different attack types, the enemies that resist one or the other, decent level design, and a pretty challenging ramp up in difficulty. My only real criticism is that it's not Muppety enough, from the various characters only cameoing for 5 seconds, to the fact that Pepe has 95% of the game's dialogue.
What's that for the goo?
Disruptor.
Insomniac may be known for Ratchet & Clank and Spider-Man today, but on the PS1 they put out this pretty good sci-fi first-person shooter, with fun levels and campy full-motion video cutscenes. Seeing Wild and Crazy Kids Donnie Jeffcoat in a lead role is worth the price of admission alone.
Tail Concerto.
Consider this a sort of cousin to Mega Man Legends, a furry action-adventure in a cute world of Saturday morning cartoon shenanigans where you stop a cat gang from causing mischief and throw all sorts of furniture around. I love the look of the game, and it's relatively easy to control, though I think the bosses start to get pretty tedious after a while. It's pretty short, but it's still a bit of a hidden gem.
Illusion of Gaia.
So I kinda had a Soul Blazer trilogy video planned at one point, but it never came together. Maybe in 2025? As the middle child of the trilogy, Illusion of Gaia ends up being the weakest, pulled in too many directions with a bizarre world trip narrative and poor localization. But it's still a pretty fun game regardless, it just ends up being a jack of all trades and master of none.
Demon's Crest.
Capcom's first crack at a semi-Metroidvania is a memorable one, with an absolutely gorgeous art style, a fun and nasty protagonist, and abilities that set it apart from its peers even in the early days of the subgenre. If you haven't played it yet, you should. It's a neat part of Capcom history.
Soul Blazer.
Now, this is going to be kinda weird because numerically I scored this one second in the trilogy, but it's actually my favorite. Yeah, the story is pretty basic and there's little characterization going on, but I really love the gameplay loop in this. I like clearing out a screen and finding out I freed someone back at the village or built a house. Maybe I'm just a sucker for seeing a town develop, I don't know, but I couldn't stop playing this one until I was done.
Mystical Ninja starring Goemon.
I had never played a Goemon game before, and this was a great one to use as an entry point. It actually manages to do 3D Zelda gameplay on par and at sometimes better than Ocarina of Time, despite coming out a full year earlier. Sure, the camera is pretty horrendous, which makes the platforming a pain, and a couple of quests were confusing to finish, but this game soars with its quirky energy, zany villains, and wild variety.
Marvelous another treasure island.
Nintendo never brought this banger to America, and that's a shame because it's an excellent swan song for the Super Nintendo, a combination of Zelda and adventure game by the guy who's been the face of just about every 3D Zelda game. Each new location has a cool hook to it, from time travel to pod people, and the only thing that brings it down is the necessity of having combat encounters. Never say never for a remake, but at this point it might be wiser to try and find a way to play this in its original form.
Terranigma.
It's true that I prefer Soul Blazer the most in this trilogy, but Terranigma is without a doubt the most polished and well-made game of the three. The action is at its best here, the visuals are fantastic, and there's a far more interesting story and set of characters than the first two games combined. I did kinda need a guide in a couple of spots, and I will miss the steady gameplay loop of Soul Blazer, but as a finale, Terranigma did manage a near-perfect landing, and like Marvelous, it's another great game kept from American shores. Unlike Marvelous though, you'll probably never see a remake of this, so go ahead and play the European version now and you'll thank me later. Alright, enough stalling, enough bullshitting, enough listless listing of games I didn't finish. Get those comment section mashing fingers ready, because here are the best indie games I played in 2024. I know that a lot of people want less hand-holding in their games. Well, here's a puzzle game that tells you almost less than nothing, and lets you loose transcribing a set of artifacts in an unrecognizable language. Aside from a letter that gives you a couple of names and translations in a neighboring language, you have to figure everything in epigraph out yourself, and I mean everything. What the glyphs mean, how the syllables work, what direction to read them in, and how the artifacts relate to one another. It's a satisfying puzzle once you've figured a lot of the rules out, and though you'll never be 100% confident in your answers, you'll at least know enough to glean the basic story, solve the final puzzle, and finish the game. Personally, I wish there was a little bit more to the game, but I appreciated that you could actually put temporary answers in this game, which you couldn't do with the developer's previous game, Cypher. Hey, Matthew Brown, maybe you could, maybe patch that in at this point? Either way, you'll want to have a physical notepad handy to draw out the glyphs and work out the connections. If you liked Chance of Sonar but wanted to play it on Nightmare difficulty, maybe Epigraph will be for you. It's always interesting to come across a freeware game that makes me a little irrationally angry that it is free. Some of these games have more features, more enjoyable gameplay, and more depth than premium games that can cost $15 or more. In the case of Torch 60, however, he had already gone the traditional paid game route before eventually re-releasing them all for free. So maybe it didn't work out for him, maybe it was a philosophy change, but I can't be too ornery about it if it was a personal decision. And hey, it's nice to have some high-quality freeware games that aren't riddled with microtransactions, for people who can't afford to just splurge $100 in every Steam sale. So let's talk about his latest game, Astra Hunter Zazma. You play a treasure hunter who has fallen through a trap floor and wound up in a strange multi-dimensional tower, with a cute animal companion who has decided to fight alongside you. This companion can't be controlled in battle, but you can sorta program them by filtering out skills you don't care about and putting points into others to power them up. Between chapters, you can purchase equipment from shops and enter this special side dungeon that expands over the course of the game and yields great rewards. Each floor of the tower has its own spatially unique theme, like a casino floor with slot machines or a harbor besieged by pirates, which stretches the definition of a tower setting, but I welcome the variety of locations you fight through. It's not the biggest or most complex RPG out there, it's pretty linear and the enemy variety is a bit limited from floor to floor, but for a free game, it's a solid 10-hour experience, and one I can easily recommend to people who want something cute and breezy. lot of mystery/investigation games on this list. And this one being lower on the list doesn't mean it's a bad one, but it is extremely short. Little Locked Rooms is a cute little detective game about observing crime scenes and then making educated guesses about how the culprits pulled them off. It stars a detective dad and his 2 kids, and the dad has put these dioramas together with the intent on teaching his kids how to become better mystery solvers. A nice feature about the game is that wrong guesses can still be rewarded with interesting dialogue, as the father will entertain incorrect theories and gently explain the faults in the logic. However, there's just 6 cases in the game, which is way too few, even for a small price point. These cases only take around 10 to 15 minutes each, so the whole thing feels like a prototype rather than a full game. Hopefully this developer can work on this concept and put together a more full-fledged project in the future. After playing the first Frogun and finding a bit lacking, I was not expecting the second game to fare a whole lot better when it looked for all intents and purposes like an expansion pack. And well, it sort of is, but the truth is, it is better. In fact, they've fixed a lot of the problems I had with the original. The levels all use a fixed camera angle now, and the grapple snappiness and magnetism is a lot more fair to the player, which means a lot fewer missed targets and significantly less frustration. I still don't love the music in these games, and I find the art style a bit on the cheaper side for a PS1 retro look, but Frogun Encore is a much less regrettable recommendation to people on the lookout for a collectible-heavy platformer. And yeah, it's got lots of collectibles, gems, skulls, note pages, and you also get rewarded for finishing levels without dying and collecting all the coins, so if you're not interested in replaying stages to get 100%, this one might not be for you. For me, the biggest downer is the runtime, a scant 2.5 hour playthrough compared to my 5.5 hour time with the first. I could probably speculate as to why this is, and I won't, because it's an indie game and I don't actually know. But that puts Frogun Encore firmly in the wait for a sale category. Did I mention mystery games? Death Trick Double Blind's unique spin involves a combination of dual protagonists and action points, as you work towards uncovering who is behind the murder of a traveling circus's rising star. Each hour gives you a few action points to work with for each character, one a detective and the other an amateur magician willing to impersonate the murder victim so that the show can go on. Examining hotspots, interrogating suspects, and pointing out contradictions each cost an action point, which forces you to be strategic in what you ask about, as well as straying from pursuing pointless leads. As you complete smaller mysteries, you'll be able to increase your hourly action points to extend your investigation. This kind of gameplay does kind of punish exploration, and so it's certainly going to be divisive among people who just want to click on everything. But I was able to solve the mystery on my first playthrough, and got nearly all of the bonus character epilogues, so it's not nearly as punishing as you might think. And when you solve each mystery under these limitations, it's a great feeling, like you just pulled off a heist. If you like Ace Attorney and you're looking for something a little bit different from the carbon copies that try too hard to be a one-to-one imitation, then give Death Trick a try. This is a weird recommendation because it comes with a caveat that you don't play it until next year. Sonar Shock is a cool little immersive sim from a bedroom developer with a Wolfenstein 3D style look that takes place on a giant Russian submarine beset by all sorts of terrible creatures. Much like in BioShock, you'll gain special powers like setting enemies on fire or teleportation. Using these abilities drains your sanity, and some neat things can happen when your sanity drops low, kind of like Eternal Darkness. As you'd expect from an immersive sim, you can crawl through vents, and you can hack keypads, although it's not quite as flexible as other sims. There's no actual stealth, enemies just see you and come running, and you can't solve problems with diplomacy. But there is some interesting stuff to do besides the main quest, like several mysteries being posed to you by literally Sherlock Holmes. It's the year of deduction. However, the big problem with the game right now is that it's plagued with mysterious frame drops related to enemy pathfinding. The game is made in the Godot engine, and the developer is at their wits' end trying to figure this problem out. It's neither a CPU or GPU issue, and running a beta branch on the latest engine doesn't mitigate all the issues either. We're talking drops as low as 7 frames per second. So give this one some time to bake in the oven and come back to it later, because it's definitely a neat little game in a genre that desperately needs more love. One of the reasons I've always wanted to do Game of the Year lists is because I get to sneak in wild recommendations like the one I'm about to talk about. Freak Hunter is a bizarre mix of dungeon crawler and light gun style rail shooter that showcases a strong PS1 aesthetic and absurdly designed enemies to fight. Each side of the coin has been carefully considered, with the movement and strafing being tile-based and authentic to old school RPGs, and the aiming and enemy movement consistent with console ports of games like House of the Dead or LA Machine Guns. You can't just simply blast away, however, as you'll need to pick up plasma orbs for ammunition, and ammo conservation becomes important in the last 2 worlds of the game. I must stress that this is a very cheap game. It's $3 outside of sales, and what you're getting for that $3 is pretty impressive. A 4-hour, 24-level campaign spread across 4 worlds that gradually introduce more threats and dungeon mechanics to keep track of, as well as additional weapons to switch to like a flak gun or a laser cannon. Like a lot of genre hybrids, it doesn't master either genre it's mashing together. I don't think the game even has proper light gun support, for example, and the dungeon design starts getting pretty cruel in the final world with the addition of a time limit and one floor that is pretty much a middle finger to people who hate teleporter mazes. But Freak Hunter is still pretty damn cool, and I don't think there's anything else quite like it this year. Games like this are why I love indie developers. Thanks, Goop Lord. Sometimes you just don't have the mental space for most entertainment. Maybe you're burnt out from work, maybe you're dealing with depression, maybe you're just stressed out and have too much going on in your life. Whatever the case, when I get in a mood like that, I tend to look for casual puzzle games that allow me to zen out. And right here, I've got a pair of Minesweeper clones brought to you by the same developer. Mega Mosaic takes a relaxed lo-fi approach to the sweep, while Proverbs is inspired by the Dutch masters. In either case, an absolutely massive 250 by 250 grid is split up into multiple regions, as you slowly fill it out using only the numerical clues and your noggin. The specific style of puzzle here is Philippix, which means there are no actual mines here and no game overs. Instead, the numbers indicate which tiles should be filled in, either light or dark. These regions can range from tiny to gargantuan, but luckily all of them feature a completion percentage tracker at the top of the screen, so you can always move somewhere else on the board and come back later. As you complete regions, they reveal a portion of an image, until you've finally completed the game and unlocked the entire painting. Mega Mosaic's picture is more of a multi-pictorial quilt, while Proverbs is one single painting. These games were perfect wind-downs to end my evening, though I did have some issues with how the error detection and fix features worked. And the soundtracks are a bit limited and repetitive, so you'll probably want to bring your own music. While the developer claims Mega Mosaic is 10 hours in length, my personal playthrough was 35 hours, and I'm no stranger to logic puzzlers. So rest assured, these may be $8 to $9 for a single puzzle, but you will absolutely get your money's worth. I've talked at length about my issues with Eiyuden Chronicles in a separate video, but as I said in that video, I still ultimately liked the game. As a Suikoden successor and having to live up to that legend, and in the wake of the tragic passing of its creator, Eiyuden had a tall mountain to climb. And maybe it didn't reach the top, but at least it made the effort. There's tons of characters to recruit, a large castle town to rebuild and furnish, varying combat systems including duels and tactical grids, and lots of side content. I just found myself very frustrated by the tedium of the combat system. As as mashing basic attacks became the optimal strategy for the overwhelming majority of the game. Magic attacks were not that good. Team-up attacks were not good, and some party members had their stats incorrectly allocated and had to be patched post-release. It's safe to say that Aiden was a disappointment and another in a long stretch of larger budget spiritual successors that don't live up to the hype. But I don't regret playing it either. Just expect it to hit a lot of the same notes as the originals to the point that it may as well be a cover song. And stick to auto-battling.
When I finally find him, my brother makes me promise not to go to the Oasis. So, of course, it's where I end up.
In the narrative space, Phoenix Springs is among the best stories in gaming this year, but actually navigating that narrative is not nearly as exceptional. It has a bold and striking look with its deep black shadows and abstract spaces, and the concept-based mind map system is a really cool alternate to the traditional inventory puzzle. You play a reporter looking to find out what happened to her younger brother, but you'll soon discover once you reach the titular oasis that you can't trust anything going on, including the story and narrator themselves. It's a very artsy adventure, with a lot of its true meaning left to the player's interpretation. I just wish that the game portions were a little bit better, because while the story is constantly engaging my curiosity, actually running back and forth trying to find the right people to talk to and at the right time of day gets exhausting after a while. Aside from a double click to run, the game doesn't have any kind of fast warp or map to expedite travel, so there's a lot of backtracking. The game often allows you to use the mind map concepts on various objects to get unique reactions, but because Iris talks in such a cold and curt manner, these reactions are not much more colorful than the regular narration. I'm really glad I got to experience the story and try to piece it together, but I think the game itself will probably have a hard time finding a wider audience unless it adds a little more personality. The word cozy has been kinda ridden into the ground by game developers and publishers, and on the one hand, I get it. People are looking for escapism in this decade, and it can be nice to play something gentler, like the video game equivalent of putting on a comfy pair of slippers. But there's a difference between slippers and Crocs, you know what I mean? The good thing about I Am Future is that it's cozy without treating its audience like they're 4 years old. It's set on a post-apocalyptic Earth, and you play a protagonist that may have played a role in that. But even with that hanging over your head, the game itself is still very chill. You'll be scavenging across your rooftop and slowly expanding your reach by building new tools and devices, kinda like the game Dismantle but without the combat, and then eventually traveling to other rooftops where you'll meet new characters. And of course, the life sim staples of fishing, farming, and automation. The progress ramp runs at a calm but measured pace, so you'll always start your day with something to do on your mind. There's hunger to deal with, but it's not aggressive. And there's a bit of corruption creep from pests, but you can just spray them away. At $20, you'll get a couple dozen hours of quality enjoyment from this before you either decide to bull rush the story or just get bored and move on. And honestly, I'm fine with that either way. Some games on this list are intense, some of them are somber, and some games are just nice. Party on Hollow Grove is nice. It's a charming little top-down adventure about a bunch of underworld friends and monsters that get together to celebrate Death's birthday, which naturally falls on Halloween. But by the time you arrive, the party's already gone sour. Everyone's off in their own world, and it's up to you to wrangle these goofballs, fix their issues, and bring the house back into party shape. Also, no big hurry, but Santa Claus has tapped into the dark arts and you have to slaughter him, or he'll destroy all of existence. And there are trick-or-treaters! Fun! It's also got a slight bit of edge to it, just enough for the jokes to sometimes get the jump on you. The game focuses somewhere in between inventory puzzling and trading quest, like the kind you'd see in a Zelda game. Helping one character usually will help you help another down the line. The artwork is charming and the character interactions are fun to read. Perhaps the scariest, spookiest aspect of this game is the lack of attention it's gotten on Steam, with only 22 reviews as I've written this. I know it happens to many games, but it's still depressing. Let's just move on before I go on a rant.
The bag that he picked up belonged to the Salami Bandit. This made him a target.
After aftercase of the Golden Idol broke out in 2022, it was inevitable that copycats would follow. I've talked before about a few of them, like The Root Trees Are Dead and the upcoming Murder at the Birch Tree Theater, but if you'd like a family-friendly take on the blossoming fill-in-the-blank investigation genre, then consider Duck Detective. You play a divorced, down-on-his-luck PI called in to solve an office dilemma that seems harmless at first, but might have sinister secrets hiding behind those cubicles. As you piece together the mysteries, you'll be selecting names and verbiage from drop-down menus in order to identify the major players and explain each of the events that transpired. You can also examine suspects close up to get a few extra details, kinda like the Frogware Sherlock games. This is another short one, and a cheap one at $10, and the mysteries aren't quite as head-scratching as its predecessors, but I still think it's a pretty good time. The tone is of course lighthearted, and the crime's nowhere near as macabre as the kind of freaky stuff happening in Golden Idol, so this game can be played by a wider audience. If you have kids, it might be a convenient on-ramp to get them interested in sleuthing. Just don't do any crimes afterwards, because they'll figure that shit out, and they'll click and drag you to jail. Botany Manor doesn't quite fit the same kind of mystery vibe as other games, although if you do want a deductive plant game, consider Strange Horticulture. You will be making some educated guesses though, as you navigate a stately mansion filling out a botanical book with the names and properties of some very unusual flora. Growing these plants requires a bit of research and experimentation, because it's not as simple as just watering them. Some need to grow in a certain climate, one needs to have its picture taken, one needs you to lead a bird to it. These conditions can be just as eccentric as the mysterious powers of the flowers themselves. As you chronicle more of your discoveries, you'll unlock new areas of the house, as well as open up shortcuts as well. Though its story tells a tale of a bitter protagonist having to deal with shitty sexists in her field, the actual game itself is delightful and cozy. Yes, I use that word. It's warm and vibrant like a summer afternoon, and the effects of the plants are silly and whimsical. Much like Duck Detective, this isn't the trickiest game of the year, and its simplicity keeps it from being in the upper echelon of open puzzlers. But Botany Manor is a perfectly fine way to spend a couple of afternoons.
Fancy yourself a knight?
What a weird, wild experience. Withering Rooms combines side-scrolling survival horror with dodge and slash combat, as you explore an asylum house whose room layouts are shuffled every time you die. It would be misleading to call this a roguelite, however, as the important locations are always on the same floor, and enemy locations seemed pretty identical. The main drawback to dying is that you lose all of your non-permanent items, but you can offer enemy body parts at shrines to add slots to your inventory that remain across runs. You'll also find a mirror-based fast travel system that retains your progress so you can just warp right to the important locations on a respawn. At first, enemies really clobber you and you're not very strong in comparison, but as the game goes on, well, you're still kinda weak, but you can also find armor and level up certain stats to improve your health and resistances, and that helps a lot. You can also cast spells, though this increases your curse meter, which you may want sometimes, because as it fills up, you'll start to see strange sights, some of which are real, like secret exits in this hedge maze. But let it fill completely and you'll suffer curse rot, which drains your health. So there's a delicate balance at play here. I don't know that the game excels in any one area, but it's so out there in its approach and execution that I think it deserves more of a look. Sliding tile puzzles have been the bane of many gamers' existence, next to crate pushing and Simon Says minigames. But Slider finds a novel way to reinvent the concept by applying it to the game world itself. Each region starts out with just one explorable tile with an NPC to help, and as you gain more tiles, more quests and puzzles start to emerge, some of which play with the rules of tile alignment or the out-of-bounds areas along the perimeter. Each region has its own fun quirk, like the far forest area having a crafting automation mechanic, or the ocean rotating tiles rather than sliding them. There's a lot of interesting surprises to discover, and once again, I'm astounded that this is free. I'd certainly have paid 10 to 15 bucks for it if they had asked. It's a clever and unique puzzle game in a log-jammed field, and it deserves a look if you're not sick of tile sliding, or heck, even if you are. I think Slider makes it fresh enough to enjoy for even the haters. So I have a bit of a confession to make. I'm not super into deck builders. I guess I did say that earlier, but this part of the script was written before that, so let's just keep going. I mean, I've given Slay the Spire a number of fair shots, but usually when I see that a game has deck building, I have that same knee-jerk reaction others must have when they see a trailer for a Metroidvania or a life sim. But there is an exception I'll make, and that's when you invoke Fire Emblem. Dream Tactics is a top-down strategy RPG with an on-the-nose Game Boy Advance aesthetic that gives each party member their own deck of moves to use on their respective turns. While the story is kinda goofy and comedic, the actual game design had serious thought put into it. The closest comparison I would make is 2022's Floppy Knights, but you're not generating new units here, and between battles you can explore wider maps to find treasure and side content. With smart mana usage and a couple of good hands, you can sometimes knock out multiple enemies per turn with each character. You'll also be able to inflict ailments and environmental effects on enemies, and sometimes even on yourself to combo with certain card types. If you can get to certain treasure chests on time, you'll get new cards or high quality gear to equip. Though each character has limits you'll need to manage. There's a surprising amount of thought put into such a cute game. I don't play a ton of strategy games, but I know that a lot of Fire Emblem and FFT clones have come up short for fans in the past few years. But at least as far as my uncultured ass goes, Dream Tactics has the sauce. And they've recently added nightmare difficulty and permadeath options for the sickos out there. It's a great fit for my favorite deck of all, the Steam Deck. No one on Earth could have predicted the return of Gimmick, let alone a sequel, but developer Bitwave Games has done a great job bringing the series into the modern era, with a heavier focus on puzzle solving that fits perfectly well with the star throwing mechanic, while also having highly technical platforming challenges for the secret stuff needed for the true ending, in the grand Gimmick tradition. The difficulty select screen even puts the higher difficulty in a place only seasoned Gimmick players can reach. So even though it may not be exactly what people wanted out of a sequel, it still has the same spirit. The look of the game may seem a tiny bit generic, but I think it's still pretty pleasing to the eye, with fluid animations and hand-animated bosses. There's plenty of collectible cosmetics behind optional puzzles and secret exits, and each stage has a fast travel system for people who want to go back and collect what they missed. Ultimately, it's nice to have a cute game and retro revival that still has a fair challenge ramp-up without being a Meat Boy rage fest. I shouldn't just say that Astrolancer is a knockoff of Compile's The Guardian Legend for the NES, because it absolutely is. But considering the amount of Guardian likes can be counted on one finger, I'm not going to be too put off by that. Much like in the original game, Astrolancer combines top-down dungeon crawling with arcade shmup sections, but there's also a decent amount of story between levels as well. You play a soldier sent to destroy the perhaps not-so-evil 4 Metroids with a bomb implanted in you that will detonate should you fail or revolt. Though it might look like a twin-stick shooter, the game adheres pretty closely to the limitations of the original NES, right down to its aspect ratio, so you can only shoot in the direction you're facing. But I found this to be perfectly fine, and they do have a strafe option if you absolutely need it. You can upgrade yourself with energy cells, so there's a little bit of build a playstyle, and the bosses are pretty well designed in both gameplay segments. I do think the shmup sections could have used some sort of score and reward system, but considering the game is only $6, I still think it's an absolute steal. Being a child of the 80s, I'll never be able to divorce myself from the arcade classics that stole my allowance. I didn't really have a lot of friends as a kid, or a teen, or a young adult, but that just gave me more time to run down to the arcade and waste money on Gyrus and Road Blasters. So anytime a modern indie game tries to recreate that feeling, I'm always interested as long as it has the gameplay to back it up and isn't cynical nostalgia bait. And Cash Cow DX has the gameplay, folks. In a style similar to Mappy or fellow indie coin-op Annalyn, your goal is to collect everything in the stage while dodging enemies. There's a glow system similar to Bomb Jack, and a power pickup to make you invincible, but otherwise you'll have to win this one with your own skill. Racking up a combo and maintaining it is the best way to generate extra lives, but quick reactivity and safe play are the only way to truly win. I'm a big fan of this one. The developer also made the inimitable Donut Dodo a couple of years ago, and this is right up there with it, with authentic feel and visuals and fantastic music. If your favorite games cost 25 cents to play, then you'll definitely want to pay, okay, well it's not 25 cents, it's $6, but you can blame inflation for that. Cash Cow is a winner, and a great one to put in a custom cabinet. If humanity ever needs to take to the stars, you'll probably find me back on Earth coughing up radioactive dust. It's not just my fear of heights and generalized anxiety getting in the way, it's also my fear of the exact kind of dilemma that happens in the game Between Horizons, which explores what happens when a second generation of citizens on board a massive colony ship taking humanity to a distant planet decides that maybe they want to have a say in how the mission goes and not just the people who birthed them. After all, they've only known life on a spaceship and have never set foot on soil, and the ship won't reach its destination until their children's children grow up. So there's a lot of resentments, and that leads to a rebel group committing some terrorism on the ship. Now, the ship isn't in danger of catastrophic failure or anything, but the mission to find a new habitat for humanity might be. So it's up to Stella, the newly christened chief of security on board the Zephyr, to track down the rebel group and either stop them or perhaps sympathize with them? Yeah, your choices will in some ways matter in this game, though the ending does obviously boil down to a binary choice. However, that ultimate choice will be decided for you by the character, based on the decisions you made over the course of the game. So I thought that was an interesting way of handling a narrative based on choices. More importantly, the game is a detective game with cases to solve and puzzles to logic out, so it's not all hinging solely on narrative. I quite like this one. It's by the developer of Lacuna, and it offers a similar gameplay structure. But while Lacuna's cases were sometimes a bit difficult to suss out, the cases in Between Horizons are all logical and you can figure them out without needing to look up a guide if you just put your brain cells together. I don't know if it's better than Lacuna in terms of the story, but as a game, I think it's more successful. And the questions it proposes are fun to think about, even though they're ultimately meaningless, because we're never getting off of this stupid rock. As you're seeing on my list, I'm not afraid of putting short games in Game of the Year contention. They're every bit as valid as 50-hour task-bloated journeys. No case should remain unsolved will run you about 2 hours, and it makes the most of that time by delivering a compelling mystery told you in scattered fragments framed like social media feeds. Your goal is to figure out who is actually saying what, and using the hashtags to draw out more questions. As you correctly sort the responses, you'll slowly unlock keys that can unlock more important posts that reveal key moments of testimony. There are also password-protected posts that require you to prove your current knowledge of the case. The framing of the story has the potential to be a little bit thorny in its portrayal. I'm sure a very enlightened breadtuber could break down why it's yucky or whatever. The thing is that I'm very stupid, so I can't really make those judgments myself. All I can say is that as a puzzle game and as a mystery, No Case Should Remain Unsolved succeeds. I did kinda sorta figure out one of the twists in the story pretty early, but that's only one component of the overall narrative, and I think the gameplay and story synergy as a whole is what makes this one enjoyable. It's well executed and not super expensive. So give this one a look if you'd like a short, bittersweet little investigation game to spend your evening. Indie RPGs really faced an uphill battle this year going against the slate of absolute juggernauts in the AAA space. Metaphor ReFantazio really knocked people's socks off. The Dragon Quest III and Final Fantasy VII remakes did an excellent job of bringing those classics into the modern age. And we got not just one, but 2 Saga titles. How the heck can you compete with that? Well, you can't. And to be fair, most indie RPGs aren't trying to win in that space anyway. They're just the fully realized visions of JRPG fanatics with a dream and a convenient creation toolkit to make it happen. In this case, Beloved Rapture took many years to see fruition, and that time was well spent. It's not the most novel or innovative game, it follows the path of a lot of other recent indie RPG darlings of mimicking the 90s classics and sticking to what people enjoyed about that era, but I think it's pretty well executed for what it is. At its core, it's a story of love, family ties, trauma, and the dark road paved by revenge. And these are well-trodden grounds for the genre, but I think that Beloved Rapture does a great job of conveying these themes through its 2 lead characters, Aiden and Johan, who find each other at the darkest moments of their lives and slowly develop a friendship and then something even more, but still are tethered to their past. The combat is solid and the exploration is rewarding, though the upgrade paths for characters are rather limited beyond simple gear upgrades and stat point allocation. I wish that Krista's character had more development and exploration, as she feels like a background character in your party for most of the game, but in fairness, this isn't really her story. I like Beloved Rapture a lot, even with its flaws, but I do hope the years to come bring out the more inventive side of indie RPG designers.
It's not always possible to protect those who choose a different path, even if they are close to you.
In a similar way as Phoenix Springs, I think that the story in 1000 Resist is pretty dang great, and there's even a little bit of overlap in theming, but the gameplay doesn't harmonize with that story as much as I would like. It involves this post-apocalyptic society of clones that live together in relative peace in a sort of mall-like structure called the Orchard, as they follow the rules set by the All-Mother, whose actual name is Iris. Basically a sulking teen turned into a demigod. Each chapter has you entering communions with other high-ranking clones, as you dive deep into Iris's past and learn about the events that set the apocalypse into motion. There's this alien force called the Occupants that caused a global extinction event through a wasting disease that humanity is unable to reverse. And a lot of this info is given to you within that first chapter, so I'm not spoiling too much here. The themes of the story go beyond just these elements though, diving into the Hong Kong Umbrella Revolution, immigration, cultural assimilation, and contrasting political ideologies. It's a rich text, and if it was a book, I'd consider it a slam dunk. And to be fair, it's still pretty high on this list. But the reason it's not as high up for me as it may be for others is because I don't think the gameplay itself is compelling enough. Or perhaps a better way to phrase it is, I don't think it synergizes well. While communions have a time-hopping mechanic to them, they're not different enough in execution from the rest of the game, which involves jogging around the same exact hub, talking to people like a town in a JRPG. And to be clear, I don't hate it, but I feel very shepherded. With most walking simulators, the story is conveyed through player discovery, but 1000 Resist tells most of its story to you through dialogue, and it is a lot of talking. There are certainly silent moments that are poignant and beautiful, but many more are hoisted on lengthy conversations. I wish there was more interactivity in the Orchard. I wish that I could snoop on people and see conversations I wasn't meant to hear. I mean, I'm playing as a watcher. I feel like that would certainly be part of the job. As is told through the story, watchers face a bit of discrimination for being too observant and intruding on privacy, but that isn't really replicated in the gameplay loop. I still think 1000 Resist is pretty darn good, but I might have liked it more if it was a purely kinetic visual novel. It was probably somewhere around hour 40 as I looked upon my giant mess of entangled conveyor belts and pollution-spewing generators, making various sprockets and thingamajigs for the Fix-It Corporation. And I wondered, am I actually enjoying this? There's no doubt that Satisfactory is incredibly addictive, a first-person factory automation game that also sprinkles in some Subnautica-flavored base building, combat, and exploration. There's plenty to build, plenty to research, plenty to explore, and the game has a solid sense of humor to it. It even manages to run on the Steam Deck. I mean, barely, but it does. Granted, the game has no proper controller support, and that's still a major issue for me. But the bigger question is whether managing all of these machines and working towards your goals is actually fun for me personally. And at times, it definitely is. But just because something is addictive doesn't mean it's good. I mean, slot machines are addictive, but that doesn't mean I'd give them a 10 out of 10. Still, I score this game pretty high because it really does tick all the boxes, and it's definitely been made with love and care. As time goes on, you'll find ways to go faster, travel further and higher, and hit harder. You could easily sink hundreds of hours into this, and thousands of people have. Just pace yourself and try to avoid 8-hour sessions, alright? Don't make this game actual work, because it can feel like that at times.
You're in my crypt, and you're coming on a quest with me through a mysterious underland.
Count this one as a game to enjoy with friends in the same room, if they're the patient nerdy type anyway. No, Crypt Master isn't a co-op game, but it involves a lot of guessing words, and we had a blast coming up with ridiculous words to try and use, some of which worked. You ascend several floors in an underground dungeon, fighting enemies by attacking their letters, and then using those letters to help fill out blank words for each character that represent a memory or a new ability. These words are themed around each character's history, like the Bard having musical words, the Sea Queen having aquatic words, and the Barbarian having a lot of melee words. Whenever you find a chest, the eponymous Crypt Master will describe the item inside to you, as you try to figure out what it is based on solely on look, weight, feel, or even smell. There are also skulls that tell you, honestly, riddles for children, but that just means you can laugh at yourself if you somehow fail them. Solving these puzzles transfers the answer letters directly to your characters. So yeah, it's wordplay, it's crosswords, it's dungeon crawling and combat, and quests and side quests. Honestly, this game rules. It's not the best thing I've played this year. I think the dungeon maps are a bit too big and there aren't enough secrets, but as a group activity, it can be a lot of fun. I had a bit of a rough night this past month, and a game that really came through in the clutch for me was this tribute to MSX greats like Maze of Gallius. The wild thing for me is that Pompous and Celine comes from a developer I once despised. Their very first game on Epic was just... Sorry to the developer, I'm gonna praise your latest game, so hang tight, but for me, on Epic was repellent. However, since that game, they've paved a road straight to my heart with quality Metroidvanias like Ghost 1.0 and its Mini-Ghost spin-off, and I think Pompous and Celine is Fran's best game by far. It's simple, to be sure, but again, child of the 80s here. All you need to know is that you control a knight and wizard looking to gain the favor of the gods in order to vanquish evil, and from there you're off to explore a large multi-region castle, gaining new items and abilities, and sealing all of the demon gates. Though you'll need some items to progress and expand the map, there's a fair bit of non-linearity to how you explore the castle, and that's one of my favorite aspects of the game. The only thing stopping you from going wherever you please are locked gates, but otherwise I was able to explore almost half of the game world before actually needing to do something to progress further, and that's just rad. The demon gates themselves are small little 20-minute dungeons of their own, as you smash up gravestones to collect the runes needed to fight a boss, so you get a tiny bit of Zelda inspiration in here too. Given that the game costs $5 in holiday sales, that's an absolute steal for a cool little retro search action adventure. This one is a bit of a tragicomedy placement on my list because my experience with the game was completely different from what anyone else's experience will be going forward. Islands of Insight is, or was, in my opinion, the best open-world puzzle game since The Witness. A glorious maximalist spectacle of endlessly rotating puzzles littered all across the game world in various categories, as well as specific puzzle enclaves that operate around a theme, and award Mario 64-style tokens to use for unlocking future areas. While it didn't match up to my initial expectations of being the modern reincarnation of the Myst Online MMO, it still greatly satisfied my need for a non-linear puzzle experience. But you can't talk about Islands of Insight without discussing the online aspect. Rather than having a role-playing component, the MMO aspect of Islands is restrained purely to seeing other players in the world and gesturing at them, which makes the online aspect feel completely superfluous, and yet it's so ingrained in the game's coding that they couldn't release an offline mode for months. And when they did, players discovered that the game was saving multiple times per second, which is an easy way to ruin a solid-state drive. They've fixed this specific issue, but also shut down the online servers and laid off most of the development team, so there will likely be no more updates to the game at this point. Adding insult to injury, the offline version was a separate save from the online version, so many players unaware of the shutdown found all their progress wiped out, which is, dozens and dozens of hours. Still, I have it up this high for a reason, which is that I think the core gameplay of the game is still great, despite some poor optimization and all of the back-end chaos. The primary meat is in the logic grids, which will appeal to any Picross fan, and the game smartly doles out new rules over the entire campaign. That's far from the only style of puzzle, though. There are perspective puzzles, spatial puzzles, speedrun puzzles, mazes, tile sliders, and match 3s. It's just a blast to run through the world solving puzzles as you're sprinting by them en route to the next enclave. And there are a lot of incentives to keep on solving, like cosmetic rewards, additional tokens, and secret stuff. If they had made the game a solo affair from the start, it could have possibly been something greater. Instead, it ends up being a weird footnote in 2024, one that I highly enjoyed, but will likely go under the radar and stay there. The creator of Baba Is You has been very busy. On top of developing a sequel to the fantastic Metroidvania Environmental Station Alpha, he's made several Baba spin-offs like the Into the Breach inspired Mobile Suit Baba, as well as a bunch of what he calls tiny block pushers. But the most interesting new release from him, in my opinion, is a solitaire mystery. That title might lead you to believe you're a detective solving some sort of card-based murder, but no, it's solitaire. A lot of solitaire. Conventional solitaire, difficult solitaire, weird solitaire, nearly 24 variants, all fascinating to learn and attempt to master. Some I don't think I'll ever win. Others, I can grok and fine-tune strategies. The look of it is interesting. It reminds me a bit of the transitional era of MS-DOS games as Windows slowly took over as the dominant operating system. At some point, I really need to talk about Cliff Johnson's puzzle games from this era because they're all fantastic. But I digress. You've got Time Travel Solitaire, Baba Is You Solitaire, Werewolf Deduction Solitaire, Wordle Solitaire. It's just a bunch of awesome, strange little Klondikes that don't always work, but are fascinating to try and figure out. And on top of that, it's only $3. You can only get it from itch.io, but I still recommend it. It's DRM free, so you can just add a shortcut on Steam or launch it directly from your desktop or whatever the hell you kids want to do. I'm not your mom. When I played the demo for Mini Shoot Adventures back in 2022, I instantly fell in love with it. Mixing twin-stick shooting with a Zelda adventure is a perfect fit, and the full game nailed the brief. You play as a living spaceship whose friends have been trapped in crystal by an evil ship called the Unchosen. Yeah, it's a species of spaceships, just go with it, okay? On the one side, there's lots of little caverns and hidden paths to explore, new abilities that increase your exploration, and upgrades to health and firepower that feel satisfying every time. On the other side, you've got smooth movement, precise shooting, lots of bullets to dodge, giant bosses, and friends to rescue that provide services back at the center hub. These two gameplay sides complement each other really well, and for the completionists out there, you can get an upgrade that shows you a real-time percentage tracker down to multiple decimals. The art has this clean graphic design look that's really sharp and easy to read without being so simple as to be programmer art. And the action is juicy and crunchy and super gratifying. I had a smile on my face the entire time I played Minishoot Adventures, and it's an easy recommendation for Zelda or Metroidvania fans. Elder Scrolls games have always been just a little bit too much for me. I've had my aversion to open-world games for a long time, but I'm not against them when the space isn't wasted. Obviously, Elden Ring is a great example of a game that makes the totality of its landscape meaningful, but Bethesda's games are, like a lot of experiences, oversaturated with activity. While some people might enjoy a discovery every 5 feet, I'm over here waving the white flag, yearning for some simplicity. Dread Delusion comes the closest to satisfying my perniciously picky preferences. It's a combination of RPG and immersive sim placed in an awesomely realized setting, and its strength lies in its willingness to let the space breathe. Yeah, each town has some side quests to go with its shops and factions, but between those towns and bridges are relatively vast tracts of explorable space that actually feel rewarding to explore. When dungeons and quests are inches apart, they feel less exciting and more inevitable. When a rich, snooty asshole wants me to check out the regional mines, and most mines are pretty small little shafts. What a wonderful moment it was to discover a massive cavern dungeon full of cultists becoming ensnared by the siren song of this crystal goddess that is slowly transforming the mine tunnel by tunnel. Of course, it's still a Bethesda-inspired game, which means each realm has factions and a trolley problem to deal with, and you can charm or lockpick your way to different solutions. Or just smash doors down with brute strength. I was very charmed by the bizarre atmosphere and aesthetic of Dread Delusion. Bold reds, purples, and greens that shouldn't really work together, but they do. Houses are just crumbling enough to allow for rooftop access for those who love getting on top of everything. There's an inn with a giant skull room. You can buy a house in every region, and near the end of the game, you even get access to an airship like a Final Fantasy game. So even though the game's approach is pared back compared to Elder Scrolls proper, it's still got plenty to do and experience in its 20-hour runtime. Maybe open world games are worth making after all. As far as narrative games go, this one isn't the highest budget or the longest, but I found it to be by far the most effective and well-directed of the entire crop. Psychroma is a slice of horror about a sort of found family unit living in a shared apartment building that get trapped in a waking nightmare due to a couple of people who can't let go of the past. And that's about as far as I want to go without spoiling the story. The art direction is truly unique and fascinating, this mix of clean side-scrolling visuals and grotesque close-ups with incredible detail. The cast is full of diverse representation, and identity does play a large role in the plot, but there are also psychedelic elements, as you would expect from the title, and a little bit of Jacob's Ladder in that you're having to guess at what's real and what isn't. You also get to snoop on people's memories if that tickles your fancy. I was pretty much captivated the entire time and love seeing each direction the story went. I know I'm no video essayist. I can't break down the themes and allegories using flowing poetic prose, or slowly lose my mind like Super Eye Patch Wolf. But for me, personally, I think Psychroma hits the best of all the story games this year. I think its use of survival horror-style gameplay works well in tandem with its storytelling and aesthetic, which puts it ahead of games who may have had a stronger narrative but less compelling interactivity. And I'm not against entirely kinetic novels like Misericorde, which I had in my top 5 last year, but when there's a strong handshake between directorial vision and design execution, it stays with me far longer. And Psychroma succeeds where others come up short, even if the game itself comes up short in its runtime, basically movie length. Keep that in consideration, but I think that it's still worth the asking price at only $10. The story of Wrath Aeon of Ruin is one of somewhat infamous delays and poor communication, but when you consider that it managed to get finished despite the major layoffs that happened at 3D Realms, it's a small wonder that it turned out so good. In my opinion anyway, which seems to not be a shared one. Wrath is a Quake tribute that runs literally on the Quake engine, with solid weapons, frantic gameplay, and massive maps to explore. Now, the community kinda hates the size of these maps, but I guess I continue to be the weirdo take freak when it comes to first-person shooters, because I actually really like this aspect. They're fun to explore and provide lots of space for firefights. It's kind of what I always wanted from Serious Sam's massive stages, which always end up being just barren kill boxes. I also played on a lower difficulty, so I didn't need to deal with the apparent bullet sponges that people experienced in the harder modes. I legit don't understand why people treat gaming difficulty modes like they're universal. There are games that are easy on hard and games that are hard on easy. If you find one difficulty not tuned to your liking, then change it. Don't just keep playing Nightmare Mode even if you hate it because you always play Nightmare Mode. It's just funny to see people running into a wall and then yelling at the wall instead of walking through the doorway right next to them. The limited save system is also entirely optional, but I thought it worked kinda nicely with the way I play shooters, and I usually had several of the save items whenever I decided to save my game. Wrath is not as great as some of the top shooters in the genre like Dusk or Cultic, but it's still really good in my apparently wrong opinion. I guess you could consider 2024 the year of the non-linear puzzle game. While the Isles of Sea and Sky have a general path of progression, the way you actually get there is pretty much up to you. These islands have lots of screens full of multiple exits and collectibles, some of which unlock more puzzles, and some of which unlock entire islands. It is a Sokoban game and that won't be for everyone. They've certainly built up a logjam in the puzzle gaming sphere over the last decade. But you can't deny Isles of Sea and Sky has that it factor. The Game Boy colored inspired art, the intricately interwoven maps, the variety mileage they get out of simple mechanics. I had played this game at launch and I thought it was great even then, but the developer has gone back and made several design tweaks to various screens and regions to tighten them up further, so I'm sure you'll have an even better time than I did. Back in May, I postulated whether this game would be held among the all-time greats like Baba Is You, and I think it's close. It stuck in my mind long after play sessions, as I continued to think about how to solve certain puzzles and what I'd do next time. This was a syndrome I didn't suffer from with Pacorette Down the Bun Barrows or even Void Stranger, as good as those games are. So honestly, I think it does ultimately belong at the top or near top tier of block pushers. If this video was titled Style of the Year, Children of the Sun would stand at Grand Canyon height above the valley of other games, indie or AAA. It's the most self-assured and boldly directed title since Signalis, though it shares almost nothing in comparison. There is no survival horror here, you are the horror. As a child raised in a supernatural cult, you wreak revenge on your captors with a magic bullet, one that travels from target to target, leaving death and devastation in its wake. As the game progresses, you learn to curve the bullet, and even better, you can activate an ability to refire the bullet no matter where it's currently heading. The puzzle lies in finding the optimal route to erase every cult member in a single shot without hitting the ground. Nothing is safe from your on-the-fly strategy. Even the birds are prey to be exploited for a better angle. After all, some enemies are armored and you'll need to supercharge that bullet to penetrate their thick shell. I don't know if I've had more fun with any other game this year. The levels are a blast to navigate, the enemy design and placement challenges you further and further, and the aesthetic and presentation are just kino. Am I using that right? I'm old. I don't personally care for Devolver's inauthentic comedy as a publisher, but they still know how to curate. Renee Rother has made an exceptional game. Animal Animal Well's time in the spotlight was very short-lived, an explosion of discourse that rapidly dissipated as the game's secrets got unveiled far too quickly. Maybe the developer underestimated gamers' ability to open a mystery box by destroying it with a hammer, but whatever the case may be, a lot of people moved on once the intrigue had disappeared. And I think that's a shame, because Animal Well is still a fantastic game even if you know its ins and outs. The map design is on the level of 2000s indie giants like Within a Deep Forest or An Untitled Story, the neon world is a major vibe, and the little ambient animation in the environment makes it feel alive and organic. Most of the puzzles and platforming are fair and balanced for a wide range of players. You don't need to do any ARGs or scan QR codes or learn assembly programming to enjoy the game. You can just play through the base campaign and have a great time. The tools you gain are utilized so perfectly that any eureka moment you have is gently invoked through the room design. Now, if you really want to dig deep into the postgame but you don't plan on a full 100% completion, there are a lot of collectible eggs that you can find just through simple experimentation. Try anything everywhere because it just might work. Secret walls abound, and they can lead to even more interesting discoveries. There will probably be a tribunal on whether the game's non-linear approach and toolset qualifies it as a Metroidvania, but you don't need to worry about that. It's just a great game, period, regardless of what folder you file it under. Just do me a favor and consult a guide if you're gonna try for the third ending, alright? For the sake of your own mental health. Short game haters, step aside. I'm not against putting a 2-hour game in my top 5, especially when they're as good as Iron Meat is. A Contra clone served with a healthy portion of body horror, Iron Meat brings a bunch of inanimate objects to fleshy, terrifying life. Of course, you get the series staples of spread shots and laser blasts, and you can power them up by collecting the same weapon twice. You also get 2 weapon slots, so you still have a backup if you get killed. The run and gun pacing is perfect, with fun little scripted environmental moments sprinkled throughout. And the bosses, oh baby, ever fight a living apartment building before? How about a train worm? The art direction is absolutely ridiculous. It's so gorgeously gross, and the pixel art is pouring over with detail. Now, I find the unlock system kinda silly, and the UI could be better, but other than that, I really have no complaints about this game. You do get a ton of lives even on the normal difficulty, so if you don't want to start with 16 of them, give hard some consideration. But if you're a Legacy Konami Code stalwart, then drop it down to easy and have yourself a good time. I've played Blazing Chrome, Super Cyborg, Valfaris, and Huntdown, and I think Iron Meat crushes all of them. At this point, you're probably painfully aware of how much I enjoy Zeldas and Metroidvanias. I guess in some sense, I'm always chasing the feeling I first got when I played Link to the Past or Super Metroid for the first time as a kid. And there have definitely been games that achieved those same highs, but no indie game has come as close to matching the joy of those Super Nintendo classics as Master Key has. You're just dropped into the world, and how you progress is partially up to you. You'll of course get tools that you can use to explore more of the map, but what I really enjoy about the game is the sheer amount of things to find. Not in the sense of MacGuffins, though there certainly are some. And finding out what new items and upgrades do is part of the fun. But every region, and hell, almost every screen, is full of discoveries. There's a sort of connection to Tunic here, but Tunic relied on more esoteric secrets, and Master Keys are more the classical kind. Upgrades to your health, to your gear, a secret post-game dungeon, and crystals that you feed to this dragon for even more bonuses. And if, for some reason, an absolutely fantastic Zelda adventure is not enough for you, there's an entirely separate, full-length Picross game available from the menu at any time. Can a game be any more Matt Wilson coded? Maybe if I also had to point out contradictions and testimonies, or there was a massive tech tree to craft my way through, we'd have the perfect game here. Joking aside, Master Key is great. It's really great. It's the absolute best of its kind among indie games, and it does it all in monochrome. With just days to go before I finalized my GOTY selections, a sudden addition got implausibly close to unseating my number one. But that's just how much fun Yellow Taxi Goes Vroom is. A sensational hybrid of 3D platforming and driving, Yellow Taxi Goes Vroom is easily the best to come out of the indie space in a long time. I like it more than Tinykin, I like it more than Hat in Time, I like it more than Lunistis, I like it more than Pseudo Regalia. The mechanics are just filthy perfect, utilizing turbo boosts, ramps, chain moves, and cancels to get you into the air and blasting towards gears, the power stars of the game. Each level is chock full of gears, and they're all super fun to find and reach. Oh, and did I forget to mention that some levels are literally crazy taxi? You'll be picking up passengers and taking them to their destination to increase the time limit in these stages, and there's more than enough to give yourself plenty of time to still be able to explore and experiment. I often award my Game of the Year to the game that was, above all else, the most fun, and that's certainly what Yellow Taxi is. It's a near masterpiece of design and goofball energy, and the vibrant low-poly visuals and killer music are the cherry on top. I'll be coming back to 100% this one for sure. What else can I say that hasn't been covered in my previous deep dive? I think most of you knew this was going to be at the top of my list, and it's certainly well deserved. The idea that you could put together a 50-game compilation with a team of just 6 people, and the overwhelming majority of those games are good or even great, is just hard to fathom. We're talking 8 games per person, one for each year of development. It shouldn't be possible. This should have been another Action 52 debacle, or at the very least, I expected the games to all be Ludum Dare-sized prototypes. Not only was I wrong about that, but the surprising depth of all the games in UFO 50 is still being uncovered. Ties to the overarching narrative hidden within Easter eggs, hidden mechanics, and, well, also some patches. Which I guess is its own interesting topic, as most people thought of version 1.0 as a finished work. But as we're seeing with some of the balance tweaks, UFO 50 continues to be an ongoing project. I don't know if that's a positive or a negative. Maybe a year from now my deep dive will feel archaic and dusty. Will there be DLC? Will those time capsules open? Can I even put myself in the mind space to think about what a sequel would look like? All you really need to know is this. I could have selected one game to represent UFO 50, namely Party House, and it probably would have hit top 5 by itself. Talk to anyone else and you'll get a completely different answer. Some people love Magic Garden, others love Mini and Max. A couple of people love Combatants, and we keep them cordoned off so they can't hurt anyone. The point is, you will absolutely find something you'll enjoy here, and then there's still so much more to discover beyond that. You could completely ignore the multi-game scavenger hunt, or the unlockable 51st game that explains the backstory, and you'd still have a package of tremendous entertainment value. Play the games chronologically, play them genre by genre, hell, play them in random order. But just play them, please. UFO 50 is without a doubt my game of the year. So, I'm kinda shocked you're still here after I've just rambled at you for an hour. But if you've hung with me for all these lists, how about one more for the road? Because 2024 was pretty amazing for indie games, but 2025 could be just as good. So here's a list of games to watch for next year. It would be redundant to say I'm a huge fan of something because, well, I'm a huge fan of a lot of things, but I really enjoy the Rhythm Heaven series, and Bits and Bops might be the best clone yet to come out of the indie space, with great music and great art. On the subject of clones, there's Angeline Era, which is a full-on tribute to the E series and its classic bump-style combat. And Windswept is what you'd get if you made Donkey Kong Country a lot cuter. On the point-and-click adventure side, there's the Wild West adventure Rosewater, which utilizes higher resolution pixel art and comes from the developer of Lamplight City. And if you prefer something less verbose, Theropods is completely dialogue-free in the style of the old Goblins games, as you play a cave woman encountering someone out of time and space while fending off dinosaurs and look, I know it's anachronistic, shut up. My Familiar is a really cool looking indie RPG that has timed hits, but otherwise has an incredible aesthetic and a cool setting. Wander Stars has a quirky mix of JRPG combat and Mad Libs mechanics, along with a lot of fun 90s shonen art and animation. Dino Quake looks like a super fun coin-op game in the style of Bubble Bobble or Snow Bros, while Outrider Mako is a long-awaited game that I played in the very first Next Fest about a delivery girl who's got to deal with fighting yokai on the way to making her deliveries. Speaking of long-awaited, the developer of the old adventure classic Shivers has a new game called Asylum that's been years in the making. Blade Chimera is the latest Metroidvania from Team Ladybug, and it looks to be their best yet. I didn't actually love the Record of Lodoss War game, but I think this one will be a return to form. As far as sequels go, there's Broken Reality 2000, Streets of Rogue 2, Discolored 2, Hyper Light Breaker, Tales of Iron 2, Orcs Must Die Death Trap, Citizen Sleeper 2, Guidonia 2, and of course, Elation for the Wonderbox 6000. Gotta play the first 5,999. And the ridiculous thing is, there are so many indie games being worked on right now that we don't even know about, from studios of all shapes and sizes to one person working out of their garage. I'll probably be playing another 100 demos in February's Next Fest, and look, even I can get excited about Okami too. The only thing I can really complain about is that, well, there's too much. And that's a common complaint to be sure, but there has to be something that can be done. Not about the amount of games, that Pandora's box is already open. Honestly, the gaming industry has just been a rapid and terrifying succession of Pandora's box openings, but I'm talking about getting these games into people's hands. Inflation has caused the price of indie games to go up across the board, and I think that people have responded by buying them less. Obviously, you'll still have your phenomena like Balatro or Vampire Survivors, but where does that leave everyone else? I was a huge fan of Grapple Dog a couple of years ago, so it dismayed me to learn that its sequel only sold 1/5 of what the original did, just going off the number of reviews. Its creator has outright said the game sold poorly and won't get a third entry. I don't have an answer or conclusive statement to end this video, but truly, what can we do to help these great games find an audience without a price race to the bottom that leaves everyone financially ruined? Master Key is the third best game this year, and it has less than 150 reviews on Steam. The cream isn't rising to the top. Fuck! Shit! Happy 2025.